Hello, and welcome to the Dissident Mama podcast, episode 24. Today, my guest is Buck Johnson, creator of the Death to Tyrants podcast. Johnson describes the show as anti-warfare, anti-welfare, pro-liberty, and himself as a hardcore paleo-libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, and a huge proponent of secession and decentralization. The Texas native is also a longtime musician and has played drums for many of the roots, rockabilly, punk, and country acts in Austin, including the great Jimmie Vaughan at many of the Ron Paul rallies back in 2008 and 2012. In normal life, Johnson is a fire department lieutenant, but in dissenter land, he's a rabble-rousing rebel and an effective interviewer who has built quite the following by chatting with an array of red-pilled folks from diverse liberty perspectives. Welcome, Buck.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for having me here. That was a good intro.
Well, I stole a lot of it from your About page, but yeah, I put my spin on it.
Yeah, you did. It was good.
Well, let's dive in. You're a very interesting person, and I want to touch on a lot of the things you do. And I can't just wait to get to the music aspect of it, but you do a lot of very interesting things. All right, so on your About page, you referenced that you have an awakening moment, and that happened about 2 decades ago when you read Harry Browne's classic book, The Great Libertarian Offer. So I want to get into that awakening, but first, let's see, what were you politically before that, if anything?
I was always kind of into against the grain type of stuff in life. My music choices have always been it almost sounds cliche to say it's not mainstream, but a lot of the stuff I'm into has always been flowed counter to the mainstream for sure. And so my politics just naturally went there. And my parents were conservative. And in the mid 90s, I started getting into politics and I thought the Republicans just seemed kind of weak. But I like some of the things they say. And so I started searching around and I got into Southern history. And I thought the idea of secession seemed like an appropriate thing, even back then in the 90s. Now I really think that. And I would take the atmosphere we had going in the 90s back in the second today. But so I guess I was like searching for something that had a little bit more oomph to it than generic republicanism did. And I certainly wasn't going to go leftward. And so I would say I was just kind of looking out for some hope, about in the wilderness, and that's when I read that Harry Browne book.
So you were political, conservative leaning-ish, had an affinity or at least some seed planted for Southern history. So what was it about what Harry Browne was saying in the Libertarian Offer? I mean, was it economics? Was it his general tenor for just individualism? What was it that rang true to you?
I think it was it's what seemed so sensible, and it was the consistency of the message. So, because I started thinking, if you're in a small government, why do you like war? Or if you're in a small government, why would you want any taxes? Because to argue we should have an income tax just smaller, but it seemed strange to me. And so when I read Harry Browne and it said the ultimate small government, we don't want an income tax. We're anti-war. You can't arrest someone for doing drugs. That's then still championing big government. The drug war is big government. And so it just made sense. And I was like, yes, this makes sense. I think this is me.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about people like Harry Browne is it wasn't just, taxes and, an economic thing can only get people so far. I think he put it in a human perspective, and that's what libertarians get a lot of grief over. Oh, they only care about themselves and they want anyone to die in the ditch, whatever, weeding out the people who, can't be the producers or whatever. But, I think people like him did a good job of really making it a human, yet dare I say, a populist kind of issue.
Yes, so, and that's been an issue since he left us with the LP in general. The messaging's been terrible because in libertarianism, a lot of people in my world have an issue with messaging, I would say, and there's almost an autism to it where they don't connect with the human emotional aspect of things. They just like the economics, and they think you're some kind of fool or a sheep if it doesn't logically make sense to you. And they think they're the smartest person in the room, and they'll let you know, and they're there to win the argument and go, see, you're an idiot. And it's like, well, that doesn't do any good.
Yeah, that always wins people over.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into a little bit of that, just messaging in general for anything I would call non-leftism. And part of libertarianism may not even fit under the category of non-leftism these days, but that may even go back to some of its history. But let's talk about you, and we'll get into some of these other weeds in a little bit. You describe yourself as paleo-libertarian and anarcho-capitalist. I think these words carry a lot of baggage, so I want you to define them what do they mean to you?
I would say paleo-libertarianism to me means a right-wing version of liberty. And by that, I mean, I define right-wing that not only do you believe in hierarchy, but that you celebrate it and that you think it's necessary. And I believe left-wing celebrates and pushes for something that's impossible without massive government force, and that's egalitarianism. And so I think a lot of what I would call blue-pilled libertarians are kind of pushing for egalitarianism and trying to form alliances with left-wing people that will hate them in the end. But I think paleo-libertarianism basically just says, look, hierarchy's not only impossible to be without, but it's helpful, it's necessary, a natural hierarchy, not a governmental hierarchy, and that's where the ANCAP part of it is in as well.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I guess that's how we know each other, because we're in kind of a couple right-wingy groups together, and a lot of words that I like have been bastardized over the years, but right-wing is making a comeback, and that's a good thing, I think, because I'm pretty much more right-wing than I used to be. And I think that is not just a reaction to leftism. I think it is a thing, because I think it does have some basic principles to it, such as hierarchy, that it is natural. And if you voluntarily submit to some kind of hierarchy, it's not bad either.
Right.
Well, what about the anarcho-capitalist thing? Anarcho, anarchy, people start losing their minds, and just capitalism.
Yeah.
Some people may say you can't be paleo if you are also an anarcho-capitalist. How do you make these things mesh?
Well, I suppose there are people that would say that. I would direct them towards Lew Rockwell and Murray Rothbard, who invented the term paleo-libertarianism and are both and were anarcho-capitalists in Murray's case, but Lew still is. I square that circle by it's kind of like Hans Hermann Hoppe's version of Ancapistan, where you can. It's only going to function properly if there were the smallest societies possible. Like he uses the phrase 1,000 Liechtensteins. And in that case, you could work anarcho-capitalism. Now, when I say I'm an ANCAP, I don't mean that's the only, it's either that or bust for me. I think that's the direction to go in. And obviously we're far from that right now. But the smaller society would secede down to, the individual. But of course, if you could have some type of small grouping of that was your society, ANCAP would work just fine, in my opinion, in that particular environment.
So you see it more as a tool, not the whole thing.
Correct. Yes. It's a nice end goal, and it's something to learn from because its consistency is wonderful.
Yeah.
And it shows that I think it wakes a lot of people up in the sense that if government shouldn't provide your food or your clothing, could you maybe consider that if they didn't provide your security, you could go elsewhere for it? Yeah. At least think about that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So unlike many libertarians and conservatives, you have an interest in real Southern history. You were even in the League of the South back in the day. So I want to find out a little bit about that. Can you tell me what that experience was like? It's had some morphings over the years, but a little bit about that first, and then why you think understanding Southern tradition is important to liberty, or if you do, maybe you've changed your mind.
I do.
Okay.
I do. And part of it's because of what I was just saying. The secession aspect of it's beautiful. And I hope we're at the point in history where those of us who are slightly well-read, just a little bit deeper than they teach you in public schooling, understand that the Southern history is not some kind of 100% pro-slavery, case closed deal at this point. And I got into the League of the South because, like I said, I was kind of searching for something back in the 90s, and I don't even know how I would have found this. The internet was such a different beast back then. But they were preaching, look, the concept of each state having its own kind of individual style, almost like the checkerboard of democracy, even though I don't like the term democracy, but each state can be different. California does not have to worry about what Alabama does, although they do. That's a different story. But that concept to me, where each state does what it wants and the federal government should be as small as possible, that's the things at the time that the League of the South is preaching. And then, of course, any state or section of states that doesn't like where things are going federally leaves. Pretty common concept, I thought. Pretty radical, I suppose, maybe in the 90s, but it seemed to also make sense to me. And I also started, like I said at the beginning, I've always kind of had a love for things that float against the mainstream narrative, and true Southern history, boy, that really flies in the face of what you're taught. And of course, the winners always get the history the way they want it to be told, and that's part of the case with Southern histories and why it's bastardized so often in public schooling. But I had a teacher, a professor in the junior college I was at, and I could tell he knew what he was talking about. And I remember he told us at the beginning of class, it was a junior college, there's like 50 of us in there, and he goes, by the time we're done, the last week, there'll be less than 10 of you in here. And I thought, how could it be that hard? It's history. You just read stuff and memorize it and then regurgitate it. But he was right. There was like 6 of us left at the end. And he taught history, specifically the time 1860s, that it was more like I was learning through my own reading. And in fact, when we were done with the class, I gave him the book, The South Was Right.
Nice.
I said, sir, some of the stuff you taught and the way you phrased things and came at it from a non-traditional way kind of fits what this book was teaching me. So I'd like you to have this. And so, yeah, that was cool too.
That's wild. Was he familiar with the Kennedy brothers, or was this something brand new to him?
He smiled. He goes, the South. He was very Southern. He said, the South was right, huh? Well, this seems interesting. Thank you. And then that was it.
That is wild. And did taking this class and joining the League of the South, did this just make a permanent impression, or did you ever go through a thing where you're like, oh, it's not that important? Because to me, it's a very huge piece of the puzzle, not only the secession puzzle, but getting to, the smallest aspect of a minority would be the individual. But from there, I don't want to be an individual without my family. I don't want to be an individual floating through the breeze and making my toaster that takes me a year to make and it works for 12 seconds. I want to be part of something. And I think a lot of libertarians, that's anathema to them. Why? I can do everything on my end. No, you can't. You just can't. Right. No person on God's green earth can. So did you ever go through a phase where it didn't matter, or it just kind of got put on the back shelf?
That's interesting. I was thinking as you said that, that version of libertarianism, I call it's like a cartoon version. And some of the libertarians fall into that because they think like, well, this is what people say I am, so I am this. And it's strange because the good libertarians obviously know that, just the story of, I believe now they're calling it iPencil, but how a pencil's made. And how, like, if you're into real economics and you understand that just that pencil alone takes so many people, there's no place where you just go, I'm my own person, but the lefties have told me throughout decades, why don't you go live by yourself in the woods if you want to be a libertarian? But so that's their version of what libertarianism is. And I think that some kind of blue pill type in the liberty movement, they just go, well, I think that's what they say I am. Is that what I'm, and they kind of, it's almost like self-fulfilling prophecy of some sort.
It's interesting, too, because they kind of go along with a definition that's probably not one of their own making. And
right.
if that radically individual, they probably shouldn't be doing that.
Excellent.
That's just my opinion.
Yes, right.
Well, another thing I like about Southern history is like the voluntary aspect of it. When South Carolina seceded, right? I guess that was almost like 160 years ago. Or more. Oh my gosh, it's been a long time. But they didn't say we want to take over. They didn't say we're going to charge into Washington, D.C. and do our thing. They basically just said we want to be left alone. But they wanted to preserve culture, borders, roots, language, that kind of thing. A lot of people do see this as impediments to the paths of liberty. When I, again, see them not only as tools, but as the rewards of liberty. I want those things. So conservatives do it as well. But a lot of the libertarians, it's all free market. I mean, again, why do so many people, you think, within libertarianism only see things in economics? And first of all, a lot of people don't care about economics. They care about money, but they don't want to read hardcore economic theory. Why is it such a stretch for them to tell you that it is human action and it has to do with people? Why is that so hard? That's
a good question. And again, I hate to keep bringing it to this, but those are the bad libertarians. And so there's a lot of them, though.
Yeah, and they're very loud.
They are, apparently, and I've been interviewing on my show people from the right, and when I talk to them offline, they have the worst impression of libertarianism. Mm-hmm. And then they'll explain, what they think it is. And I think, oh, man, we have got to get the good voices louder than they are, because we're up against it out there because of what you're saying. Yeah, libertarians now so often will just, like I said, they take the human factor and the emotional factor out of their presentation and just pretend like if you don't understand basic economics, you're a fool and you'll never be anything. And meanwhile, they're sitting here, an extreme minority party with no friends. And it's like, it looks like you're the fool, Yeah. And so the messaging is really a big deal with libertarianism. And I think, but I'm in a bubble a little bit because I surround myself and interview the good ones. Yeah. And so sometimes I feel like, well, it's getting better. And I do know some gossip that I'm not allowed to discuss yet. As far as what's happening within the LP over the next few years, it's going to be very good. But it's not right now. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, and that would be my thing too. I would call myself, I guess, kind of because of the modern term, a former libertarian, but I certainly have many friends that call themselves libertarians that think their worldview is pretty darn close to mine. So I would like to see something happen to the LP, and we'll get into maybe electoral politics in a little bit because we do need some other options. So yeah, the LP right now, not good. Well, let's talk about, I guess I would call myself a paleo-conservative, paleo-con. You run in circles also with quote-unquote conservatives. And, the question is, what do you want to conserve? And talking to you as a paleo-libertarian, you want to go back and conserve things that promote liberty and human flourishing. So what do you think is the problem with the conservative movement? Is it too big tent and like America is an idea? Or is it just they want to kind of throw everything that's, borders, language, culture under the bus because they don't want to be called racist? I mean, do you see there's any bridge building with just like a normie con? Or are we just preaching to like a very small group of people that we want to like light a fire under?
Man, I can go off on this one. What's wrong with the conservative movement? Well, I can tell you, first and foremost, and I think Jack Kerwick just wrote a similar piece, and I thought this even before I read his piece, but I did like what he wrote. they are gutless, ballless, scared, wanting approval from their enemies, and wanting and agreeing to play on the field that their enemies paint. Mm-hmm. And it is a losing proposition. And I do think the Trump moment helped red pill some conservatives.
I agree.
And it did wake. I mean, I don't think that it did. And that helps somewhat, because now there are some people, like you said, a normie con. I call them some boomer cons, and that's what my parents are. And Mine it's too. Starting to wake them up. You know, and it worked for me as well. You know, I remember watching one of the Trump debates when he was still going for the nomination, and when he's talking about his hand size and everything, and I was like, oh my God, I texted my dad and I said, what an embarrassment. And he said, the Republicans need to be embarrassed. And so he was getting it before I was even.
Yeah.
And so the problem historically has been, I think it was William F. Buckley that, who I'm embarrassed to say that I was named after, who said something like, yeah, that's a whole can of worms. But I got him back, see, because I'm Rothbardian, who he hated Rothbard. I think it was him that said conservatism is standing in the face of history coming at you, or something like that. But it's like, what kind of messaging is that? Who would sit there and basically say, this is inevitable that we all go this left direction, but I'm going to stand here in the face of it? Okay, that's not going to do much. So even back then, they were basically too scared to stand up, say, look, I'm not playing your game. This is my game. You want to play it? We'll fight it out. But there's been too much concession. I think a large part of it was the neocon movement, because Absolutely. Those people are all essentially leftist. And so a leftist movement infiltrated the right, kicked all these old right people out. And I think the Donald Trump phenomenon helped at least kind of start to see, like, wait a second, I do have some friends over here. Look at, it removed part of the fog from the conservative movement, and the weak fog that has just bogged them down for decades. And so maybe there's some rays of light shining in now. We shall see.
Yeah, and I agree. I hang out with a lot of homeschool moms and, quote unquote conservative Christians. And maybe if the COVID madness hadn't happened, they would just kind of keep skating along and, listening to Ben Shapiro. But I'm telling you, they're pissed. And they, I'm like, why didn't you read my blogs 2 years ago on the loyal opposition? Come on, people, go back and reference that, but they're waking up, and it may be too little too late. I don't know. I don't know what late is. We don't need to think in terms of like tomorrow, but maybe like decades or hundreds of years, honestly, to undo the leftist insanity that we're all living in. But people are waking up, and all the stuff that is thrown at us really is lighting a fire under people. So I would say populism is the next thing I want you to define. I think I know what it is. I think I know historically what it means, and I don't think it is Teddy Roosevelt anymore. So tell us what populism means to you and what you see, if that plays a part in moving forward.
I think it does. I always, I said I was into Southern history. I read George Wallace's, one of the biographies on him back in the early 2000s. And that's when I started hearing it. I do kind of remember it from the Pat Buchanan days. Mm-hmm. But I started thinking, so George Wallace was a populist. And so, obviously it's been thrown about quite a bit these days. And I've read a lot of Murray Rothbard's writing on it as well. I guess I would define it as an appeal to people's, I almost hesitate to say emotions, but that is part of it. And because just sitting there saying Social Security will fail, I've got these charts that demonstrate that in the year 2022, we will not have enough money, that gets so old for people. But if you can appeal by saying, look, all of these elites, they hate you. They hate what you're doing. They hate what you represent. We have to have a movement we don't have to agree on everything, but we do know this small elite that runs the university system, the federal government, the entrenched bureaucracy within the federal government, and filtering down through state governments, they're all working against you. Mm-hmm. So let's team up in some manner and at least try to defeat that part of it.
Yeah.
Then let the chips fall where they may. We can argue on tariffs way down the road.
Yeah, exactly. And there does come a point where it is kind of an us versus them mentality that, you know, a lot of people would probably eschew. I know a lot of people don't like that word, but it worked there. That they would eschew in years past. But I mean, if you start looking into the Great Reset and, you know, mandatory vaccines and stuff like that, and how corporations are getting richer and normal people are getting poorer. And I never thought I'd be talking in those terms even like 2 years ago, you know, the wage gap and, you know, all these things, but it's like, it's pretty obvious to see the writing on the wall. I think we need to start thinking in those terms and then deal with the ramifications after. And you brought up Kerwick's article. So what are ways that we non-leftists, paleo-libertarians, anarcho-capitalists, anybody who's not wokey woke person, what are we supposed to do to move forward to kind of tamp down on centralization, bring back localism, do something, keep our own sheriff in check, whatever. I mean, what are we doing? I talk to people all the time, and some people have good advice, but people want to know, what do you think? What can we do?
I mean, it's going to be an educational movement. It's going to have to be, and that doesn't mean necessarily explaining history and economics and philosophy to a normie, but just pointing out certain things. There's so many, the left is moving so fast now because it felt like this Trump moment kind of derailed them for a second. So rather than going incrementally like they've done for decades, they start pushing leaps and bounds. And that in itself, I like that. When I see things like a protest because the cops shut down a private individual's restaurant for COVID reasons, I don't like that it's happening, but I like that it's in everyone's face, because that right there is a red pill moment for everyone who sees it on TV. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people that see it on TV. That's educating people. So you start to realize one of the things conservatives are going to have to realize, look, I know this back the blue thing's been part of your in the fiber of your being for a few decades, but look on TV at the news stories. Who's arresting law-abiding citizens? Well, I guess it's not law-abiding if they're breaking these lockdown laws, but who's arresting peaceful citizens trying to make a living? It's the cops. Now, are they all bad? No. There's been, which is nice to see, there's these sheriffs that are putting out videos saying we're not going to enforce these type of things, but you got to realize some of them are. And so it just a blanket statement of back the blue, you might want to move away from that for a little bit. And so it's going to take it's going to take bad things to educate people. But man, 2020 has been such an insane year, full of so many bad moments and some good ones. But I think that has helped red pill a lot of people. It's going to still take more, and it takes voices, I suppose, like ours, pushing the narrative in the correct direction, because there's always going to be a widespread narrative being forced upon us from up top. And to push back, to have more voices that push back on that, I think slowly but surely will red pill enough people. It only takes, Ron Paul always talks about the remnant, it only takes 10% of people to move the direction of which, and the left knows that very well. They've been doing that for a long, long time on purpose. And they know they have a wonderful long-term planning. And I'm almost jealous of how good they are at what they do as far as the university system and the whole, what we call the cathedral. They're really good at it. And I think the right needs to wake up in that sense and realize, like, look, push back against this narrative. These quit kowtowing to it and going, well, they've got a point. They don't have a point. They want you dead. So once you realize they are the enemy, you have to fight like that. You can't just say, well, go along to get along, and I guess I gotta shut my store down. No, that should not be an option. That should not be an option at all.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is something that can be planned or if it's just something that should happen and then it like is a brush fire kind of thing. But so, for example, I have a friend, she owns a dance studio. I actually don't live in the city, but the closest city to me, the mayor decided she was going to have a call line, and you could call in and tell if people, were breaking whatever the stupid mandate rules are. And then the local media, of which I used to work for, I am sad to say, would just list these people, and it was an anonymous tip. So you couldn't even defend yourself against the accuser or say, I wasn't doing that or whatever. It's insane. But, say they come to find her, because in my state with King Cooper, Roy Cooper, you can get fined $1,000 or whatever. It's madness. But so if my friend at her dance studio, 5 people weren't wearing masks, $5,000, she just says, I'm not paying it. And we all stand out in front of her business and say, you're not enforcing it. And she's not paying it, and you're not shutting her down. I mean, I think that's what needs to happen.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. This sounds slightly radical, but I was watching TV and I was saying this out loud to my wife. There was Tucker Carlson was showing, it was a bar owner, and I believe it was in Staten Island, New York the other night. And he said, I can't shut down. I just can't do it. I'll go broke.
Yeah.
And they sent a police force to put a blockade across the street where no one could go to the man's bar. And there was 1,500 people that went out there and protested. And I said, man, if the guy could afford it to hire his own serious, we're talking Blackwater type security force to walk out to those cops and say, this is our place. We are security. You're not needed here. If it gets violent, it gets violent. But it's going to take something like that to make some points.
Yeah, and I'm very much into the monuments, and I'm from Richmond. And when Mayor Stoney of Richmond was doing all these illegal things and just doing them, Black Lives Matter have visited Mayor Stoney's house once. They went up to his front door and scared him to death. I'm like, I don't know if I want to scare him to death, but why don't we pay him a visit and tell him? Yeah. And everybody's like, you can't do that. And I'm like, why not?
Right.
And everybody's like, 2A, the Second Amendment's so great, but then nobody actually wants to, and I'm not condoning violence, but I am saying guns aren't just for going to shoot at the shooting range. They're just not for target practice. And I think that's what Kerwick is really saying, and as recent is, 2A is nothing if it doesn't have teeth. It's just a hobby. And we don't have time for that. So, my thing would be, if you have a neighbor or know somebody, stand up for them and just say, you're not going to force this. And it would depend on the police force and the sheriff, and if you can find lawyers and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, I think that needs to happen sooner rather than later. And it has happened in certain places, but it really needs to happen en masse. Do you see anything like that happening in a country where everybody's still, even though some people are waking up, still kind of sleepwalking through everything, masked?
I do see it. I think it's getting closer. This will be interesting to listen back to in about a year. But I think it's getting closer.
We'll be hanging out in a gulag together by that point.
Drinking, I hope.
Yes.
So I think it's getting closer, and I do think Trump had a large part in that, because it is pretty apparent to at least most of his voters. Interesting, when you try to fight this system, it appears to be pretty hard. You can't really fight it very well unless you really know what you're doing. Excuse me, my phone. And for him to hire someone like John Bolton so clearly, but what that did, I think, is someone's in the wings watching. Okay, I saw Trump's mistakes. I saw what worked, saw what didn't. So there could be some kind of figure in the wings waiting to stand up and lead the right-wing dissent populist movement. Who knows? But just organically, a grassroots style, I think it's happening. Honestly, if Biden gets into office, which I suppose it looks probable at this point, I'm not discounting anything, it's 2020, but and he says national lockdowns, Texas isn't going to do it. I don't love our governor. He's fairly milquetoast, but he has said, I'm not doing lockdowns anymore. And that's going to take, if Biden, for one, the national lockdowns seems unlikely because I think it's constitutionally impossible. Who knows? But I could see governors like Christie Noem, I think is her name, and the Texas governor and some of these other states, they're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's going to take
nullification, right?
Yes, and that's one form of it right there. And I think we could be talking at some point in the near future secession. I do think had Trump won, and still think if he were to somehow still win, we might see California kind of effectively be gone.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would look on paper as far as social security payments, what military defends them. I think for all intents and purposes, they would become what Gavin Newsom has already referred to as a nation state.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saw the guy who heads Cal Exit, or at least he did. I think he's still in charge of it. I think his first name is Daniel Ruiz Evans. And I mean, they've got their ducks in a row out there. And I mean, he would call himself a liberal, but they do not want to be a part of these United States. And I
love that.
They know that things, military bases and all that stuff, that all needs to be ironed out. But yeah, they would be ready to go. It would be complicated, but necessary. And, you brought up the election, and that's another thing. Some of my more normie friends who are extremely smart, I mean, they're homeschoolers. A lot of them are anti-vax. I'm not necessarily anti-vax, but, questioning vaccines is good, definitely, depending on the vaccine. But this whole election, it's always been like, one more election. We got to get this person in to get a Supreme Court justice. We got to do this and do, they were such rule followers. And now all of a sudden they're like, wow, that's all a big sham. So it's pretty wild to see, the scales coming off their eyes.
Yes.
But so we're talking about doing things, but ideas are important. They plant seeds, they start movements, they undergird movements, they bring people together, they weed out people. So you're an idea guy. Why did you start your podcast, and how long has it been going, and how is it evolving?
That's a good question. I started it because I kind of just wanted to meet some of these people that have had such a substantial impact and influence on my life, and I've gotten to do that and interview them. I thought also I had a lot of normie friends, and we'll talk about music, I suppose, soon, and especially in the music scene, that were always kind of asking me, hey, what's the libertarian stance on XYZ? And I thought, maybe if I just get a podcast and I have people on there that are really educated and that I kind of want to meet anyway, then I can get their voices out to these normie friends of mine. I don't know how well that part of it worked. I do run into a lot of people at work and sometimes in the music scene that'll surprise me with the, hey, I listened to your last episode. That guy, that was really good. And it's like, you listened to it? Okay, well, that's cool. So I do run into that a lot, and I've had multiple people say, I guess I am a libertarian. I didn't think I was, or I didn't. It's funny. A lot of people thought the lib part of it meant some liberal, and I get that quite a bit from normies. And they'll kind of say, sure sounds like you liked Donald Trump, or you seem kind of right-wing. I thought libertarian meant liberal. So it's interesting to see the process for some normies over the course of time, but it's changing. I suppose it has changed that, my thoughts, my political thoughts, my philosophy on things is constantly evolving. And so I'm a way different person than I was when I started the podcast, and I will probably be a much different person than I am now. And 2 years from now, I've been doing it going on over 2.5 years. So yeah, it's been amazing. I've interviewed Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell and Jeff Deist and Tom Woods, and these people that are just have had such an impact on my life. Especially Ron Paul was like the cream of the crop for me. And then I've now become friends with Alana Mercer, who I think is wonderful. And it's just been a great experience. It's and now I actually make some money off of it, which is a nice, nice extra for me.
I mean, did you have any broadcast training, or it was just like, I'm going to get a microphone and start talking to cool people?
That's what it was. It was that. I remember the first one I did, I usually do Skype audio, so I don't want my guest to see me like reading and looking and taking notes. So I just do audio, but the first one was video, and I was in a closet because the room wasn't set up correctly that I needed to be. And I was like, man, this guy must think I'm such an amateur. And for the first, 6 months, I wouldn't listen to them back.
Oh yeah.
Couldn't stand hearing my voice.
I hate hearing my voice too.
Well, you have a good voice. You should listen to yours. And I've since been able, I actually found that listening to them back makes me correct little things here and there. I'm hard on myself, and so I'll hear it and go, I used the wrong word, or I said something that didn't. I'm just real picky when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I've learned that listening to them not only helps you hear the interview differently, because while you're interviewing someone, sometimes you're thinking of the next question.
Yeah.
So it helps you hear out the guest even better, but it helps you kind of attempt to perfect the way you do things as well.
Well, I will have to do that. I know my husband tries to get me to do that sometimes. I'm like, it sounds weird. But you can see, my setup here. I've got my one Dissident Mama shirt in existence hanging behind me. A dog bed, apples to apples and board games behind me. It's very professional around here. Okay, so I hear through the grapevine that you have big news about the growth and direction of your podcast. What's going on? Is there some kind of big news that people need to know about?
Yes, there's some big news coming down. When will this be released?
What's today? Tuesday?
Today's the 8th. Yes.
8th. It's December, right? It usually takes me a day or two to get it out. If it needs to be
soon.
If it needs to be sooner or later, I can make that happen.
No. I depending on when it was out, is what I will make the rules on what I say. So,
well, if you want me to get it out tomorrow, let's just say tomorrow, and I'll make it happen tomorrow.
Oh no, because most people won't know this till January. I'm going to announce it as it happens.
Okay.
It's just that the long and short of it is that a network is taking me on, and it's a very well-known person in the podcast world that I won't say his name at this point. But he's not Joe Rogan. It's not Joe Rogan. Okay. Everyone says that because he's here in Austin now. Well, I'm not. He's in Austin, 30 minutes from me. It's not someone that huge. I wish. It's someone in this world, and he's got a network starting up, pulling together some other podcasts, and mine will be one of them. And so with that, there will be a name change, and I will broaden some of the stuff I do a little bit. What's really cool is the person running the show said, I think it would be cool if you focused some more than you already do on the paleo-libertarian aspect of your views. And I was like, wow, okay. That's the last thing you would think that a bigger audience is going to be asking for, but we'll see. So that's a really cool. Basically, I'm free to do as I want, which of course, if there were hardcore a structure around it, I'd have to push back. But I'm going to get to focus on the music part of my life a little bit, and the fitness part as I see fit, no pun intended, to do along the way, because there is interest. So I get a lot of questions from people asking my workout routine, which at first was strange to me. But I do get that. And so I'm going to be allowed to go into that aspect of my interests as well. And it's just, I won't say the name of the new show yet, but the name of it encapsulates the kind of overall trend throughout my life, whether it be music, politics, whatever, that I have always been interested in pushing against the grain and pushing back on the narrative that's always forced upon us. And so it will deal a lot with that.
That's wonderful. So you're going to be kind of under an umbrella, and within that, you're going to be hanging out with other interesting podcasters?
It's basically a network that is in charge of the marketing for my podcast.
Okay.
It's the person doing it already reaches a huge audience compared to mine.
I'm dying to know.
And so I'll tell you off air.
Okay.
That's how you really get the people upset. Guys, I'm going to tell Rebecca. You won't hear it.
That's right. And we'll just have you back after you're like big guy in January. And you're already big guy. So I can't wait to hear. I mean, because you have, how many average downloads do you have for?
I'm doing around, depending how many episodes, I'll do about 17 to 20,000 a month.
And you put out one a week? Is that?
Yeah, one a week, sometimes a bonus as well.
Nice. Well, congratulations. I can't wait to hear more about it off the air.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about your music because I love Dale Watson, and you know Dale Watson. So
I do. I love Dale Watson.
Yeah, Dale Watson, just a quick thing for people who don't know him. He's like classic country guy, sings songs about how, where did Loretta go, Johnny Cash, all this new stuff, whatever. It stinks. You got to stick with your roots, which is why I love classic country. But, I saw Dale Watson a lot in the 90s. In fact, I thought about it the other day after we talked that my husband and I went to Texas. He's from Texas, from Pasadena. And
your husband is?
He is from, Pasadena.
Oh, that's where Dale's from.
Yeah, I know. And in fact, the first time I met Dale and he signed, something for me, I said, will you sign this for my boyfriend? He was my boyfriend at the time. And he signed it, for my brother from Stinky Dina, because they, said it was Stinky Dina. Yeah. But my husband and I went to Texas for our 1-year anniversary, just specifically to see Dale at Jenny's Little Longhorn. And
oh my gosh, I used to play there all the time. When did you do that?
This was 2001. Our anniversary is in October. You were probably in the band.
That is so cool. I never was in Dale's band for actual band, but it's funny because his drummer, the last few drummers, but specifically the one he's had now for a while before he moved, he would, as soon as he saw me, he'd go, "Hey, Buck," show me his sticks, will you sit in? So he could go drink, hang out with women or whatever, go to the bathroom. And it's kind of the etiquette in Austin was if you sit in, it's for 2 songs. Okay. And it's kind of the unwritten rule. When I sat in with Dale, it would be sometimes 40 minutes, because the drummer's yes, another drummer's here, I'm out.
Stretch it out, Dale. I'm hitting on this lady over here at the bar. Yeah. So you know Dale Watson. You've interviewed him back in March. I'm going to link to that because I only had a chance to listen to a little bit of it, but I want to listen to that. So I want to get into kind of a little bit of your music, but how have the shutdowns affected the Austin music scene? I live in North Carolina. Things are insane here. Has it been okay? Or just
it's been devastating. I have not played a gig since February, and it's now December. Some of my close friends that are strictly professional musicians, no other job but that, they have played some, I would say, in the last 2 months, some outdoor gigs and stuff. But otherwise, it's been, the lockdowns, and specifically the bar, not just the lockdowns within bars, but the capacity limits. I believe it's 25% here. That has just devastated the Austin music scene. It's been it's gone for all intents and purposes. And like I said, there's some outdoor gigs, but it's about to be it's cold here, December and January. Regardless of what people say about Texas weather, it does get quite cold, and so an outdoor gig's going to almost be pointless or impossible. So I don't know what they're going to do. Continental Club is one of the most famous bars in Texas for sure, certainly in Austin, and they still have not opened since March because
that's a travesty.
It is, and it's the amount of people allowed in there isn't enough to make the owner enough money to pay everyone to work there.
Yeah,
and so, or certainly to pay a band to play there. And so it's been bad. You mentioned Jenny's Little Longhorn. I have seen multiple posts. Help out Jenny's, and do what you can. Now, people play at Jenny's and they broadcast it over the internet. And so people send money that way.
Yeah.
But man, it's
not the same.
No, and it's the irony of some of this is that a lot of the left-wing musicians I know are so for the lockdowns. It's like, it's destroying your industry, you fools, and a lot of them will say, well, that's where the government's supposed to come in and give us money. And at some point it's like, what money? Like, if people aren't working and paying, I mean, I know we all know about the Federal Reserve and they'll crank it out, but certainly these people don't realize that. And so there's just strange idea of like, there's wonderful money out there and I don't have it in my hands because some rich corporation guy has it, and he's not giving it to the bar owner to not be open or to give to me to not work. It's a mess, man. I think if not for the industry moving to Austin, like Apple, Elon Musk just moved to Austin and Tesla's opening a plant. If not for that kind of stuff, Austin might look like Detroit here in a year or two.
That's wild. And that's interesting about the kind of the left-wing musician, that's just typically the stereotype that, people in the music industry lean at least liberal. But you would think, a person who's playing maybe part-time in a rockabilly band, he's not doing it to get rich, right? He's doing it because he loves music. So now he's just sitting around waiting for a government check. That's sad that's what the conclusion some people have come to.
I know several musicians have said exactly that. They're full-time typically, but they're saying, well, I don't feel comfortable. The left has been, I don't know if it's fake or if they really believe it, this fear of COVID is ridiculously exaggerated, but I don't feel safe playing a gig. And so I should just not, it's like, well, you don't do anything else. Yeah, I know. Right. And it's like, so you just want to literally sit there for 8 months and do nothing? It's crazy.
Yeah. And you think of, the typical Austin musician, kind of a rebel and, drinking hard liquor, probably having a little, anonymous sex sometimes or whatever, maybe not anonymous, but, not like living by like the best hygiene standards, but all of a sudden they're scared of COVID. It's just weird.
Yes.
I'm like, how old are you?
Yes, I know.
I'm encouraging you to be doing these other things, but that's like not your thing. You're supposed to be wild and free.
I know exactly, and they're not. I know a far left-wing country singer, and he smokes cigarettes, has asthma, and is, of course, deathly afraid of COVID. But it's like, the cigarettes don't bother you; they don't scare you. It's like, we know that will kill you at some point. Yeah. So it's a lack of consistency. I know that will shock you.
Yeah, so, the country song about, the one-night stand and the hard drinking, now it's going to be about, I don't know, staying in your
wearing
house.
A mask. Collecting a government check, doing nothing.
Last question about that particular aspect of it, the industry itself. Is this a mayor thing, an Austin thing, or is it a state thing?
Let's see.
Or both?
It might be both. I do know this. I actually did some research. The cities can't do too much more than the state is doing. I believe they can moderate, call out how much, what percentage of a crowd or a capacity can be in a restaurant or bar. I do know El Paso tried to actually lock down again, and the governor said, nope, you can't do that. So I believe Austin, with the 25% capacity in the bars, is just going off of what the state is doing. As far as I'm a little bit cloudy on that, but I moved out of Austin during all of this, so that's one of the reasons why. So I don't know for sure.
Are you from Austin originally? What part of Texas, if you don't mind me asking?
I was born in Houston.
Okay.
But I've been in Austin for 22 years, and now I'm in Lockhart, a city 30 minutes outside, a small town, 30 minutes outside. And check this out. The other day, I'm not going to say the restaurant just in case there's some insane people listening to this, but I went to a restaurant here in this small town, not one mask in the entire place, including all the people that worked there. And I saw the owner / head chef lean down to get something, and he had a pistol in his back. And I was like, this is
home.
Yes.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, Houston. So, my husband is was born outside of Houston, born and raised. And then Houston is a surname on it would be my mother-in-law's side of the family. So my oldest child's name is Houston Lee. You can probably guess why.
I got where you got.
Lee is his middle name.
That's very cool. I love it.
Yeah. So this may be a moot question considering, the current state of music, but, I get that, musicians do lean left. There's always been this melding of like the folk musicians and the country people, and everybody's the acoustic musicians, and there's been a left-wing vibe. But there seems to be, there is an anti-Southern bias against people who, their fans are Southern. So, Dolly Parton, said BLM is great and, changed her Dixie Stampede name. Lady Antebellum, I don't even know if we'd call them country, probably not. They're Lady A now. Dixie Beer isn't Dixie Beer anymore. Dixie Chicks or whoever, the feminists, I don't know what they're called. So how can roots music continue on if they keep spitting on their roots? Like, what's the deal there? Do they just think they're gonna co-opt the cool things, the one night stands and the drinking and all that, and just keep writing songs about, I don't know, being woke? Like, what do you see as a person in the scene? Because I always think, why are you going this direction? It's just very strange.
That is a wonderful question, and you put it very well. I don't know, and that is a battle I've had in my mind since I got into rockabilly in 95. And since then, to this day, I still have this fight in my mind of, I don't get this, because there's been a massive, massive push by lefties to get the Confederate flag image out of rockabilly, which it was fairly ubiquitous in that scene for years and years and years. And it's like the biggest rockabilly festival in the world is in Vegas. They won't allow any performers, any rebel flag stuff anywhere. So that kind of thing. And then I know some very good singers that sing old style country and rockabilly that are so left wing and just crap all over tradition and family and all of those kind of things that, people like a young Elvis Presley was raised with these traditions and these values, and here's these modern lefties like crapping all over it, yet singing the songs. And so there's always been, I don't understand it, and I've seen it in country. Luckily, some of the more hardcore, true country guys like Dale Watson are not left-wing at all. And so you see that and you're like, okay, that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. But I just don't get this far left push within, leftism is a supremacist movement. And so until it takes over everything, I guess they're not satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're resisting against it. And I was so glad I hadn't seen Dale Watson in a long time. I think I've only seen him one time since I've had kids. So in the past 13 years, only once took my kids to see him. But I had a feeling he wasn't a left winger. And then now knowing that your friend, and I can't wait to listen to his interview with you. So I'm glad there are some normal people out there in Texas still. Thank you.
Yes. And Dale, we're trying to get him. He's trying to move here to Lockhart. So nice. We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Well, listen, what else do you want to tell the folks? Anything you feel like we didn't touch on? If you want to accidentally mention the name of the person who's, giving you your platform, you can do that. But anything else you want to, or some guests coming up on your show, you want to give us a tease about that?
Let's see. I'm about to interview a friend of mine that's a power lifter, and I don't. Some of your fans or your listeners might be familiar with Michael Malice, and this is his personal trainer. But he now lives here in Texas. He's a friend of mine, and I'm talking to him about the lockdowns and how it's affected that industry. Okay. He was talking to me one-on-one at a party the other day, and he said, he's from New York City, so he's still friends with a lot of personal trainers and gym owners up there. And he said, one of my friends told me she's maxed out 12 credit cards because she can't work. And it's like, when you hear things like that, it's like the amount of harm this stuff is causing is immeasurable. And so I'm talking to him about the effect that the lockdowns and COVID moment has had on gym owners and people like that. I'm still working on a couple of more guests. I suspect one of them this month will be yourself.
Woohoo!
We got to schedule that. And
I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm getting things ready. You know, it's December, and before you know it, it will be January. So I'm getting all my ducks in a row as far as the transition and the move to the new name, the new image, I suppose, artwork, whatever you want to call it, and who I'm going to have for the first few guests once it's changed over. And I'm working on all of that kind of stuff. You can see anything, hear anything that has to do with this current podcast, Death to Tyrants, at deathtotyrantspodcast.com. That's got my Facebook link, Instagram link, Twitter, T-shirts you can order, all of that. It's got every episode I've ever done. All of that's at deathtotyrantspodcast.com. And we'll have to be changing that name soon too, I suppose.
Well, congratulations, and it sounds very exciting, and you are an ideas guy, and being that we probably agree on most everything, I'm really glad you're succeeding in the world, and you are just a voice for reason and kindness, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Rebecca. This has been awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Buck.